Sarah Harding is on the podcast again. Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me back.
It's great. We're keen to talk about the budget and small businesses in Australia and what's going on.
No, I know. So, obviously like many other people, was tuning on Tuesday night to hear the federal budget from home. And look, a lot of what was said during the budget speech, and since, I think, was definitely to be expected. So there was a lot of commentary in the media leading up to the budget around, what the government was proposing to do on budget night and some of the policy agendas for this budget. So I wasn't really surprised when I heard, I guess, the treasurer talking about some of the proposed changes to the tax regime, or even just to who they're prioritizing with their budget as well. So a lot of it was to be expected, and I guess since then, um, I've definitely been following the commentary online about, how people are feeling. And look, when you look back at history, of political cycles and governance, they definitely say that the Conservative Party or the Liberals previously were definitely better with economic management. And I think today, everybody in Australia can definitely see why.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's unpack to start with all of that because I'm going to assume and trust that I'd have people listening who are on any end of the political spectrum. And I wanted to clarify when we are talking about conservatives, the conservatives who I'm close to are not telling anyone else how to live their lives culturally, socially, at least from my view. Love who you want to love and wear what you want to wear. But we're zooming in right now on the economic management and on how to handle finance. And it seems like some conservatives in particular are passionate about supporting small businesses. It's empowering for individuals and giving people opportunities beyond the dependence on the large corporations, be it the Coles and Woolies, whatever else. Is that your understanding of all of this?
Yeah, so I guess if you look again at, who the budget was targeting, and who I guess, or who it was advantaging and who it was disadvantaging, it was very clear to see that the themes that have always played out from a Labor government were definitely, entrenched in that budget, right? So it was very much about like, being seen to be helping, workers who are, paying a lot of tax at the moment. And, the theme was very much around getting more people into housing, right? Because we all know there's an issue out there with the younger generation trying to get into their first home. So that was very much who it was pitched at. Very much anyone who was working at the expense of anyone who is looking to do anything else. Being the fact that what was clear was that anyone who was attempting to invest, not necessarily investing into superannuation, but anyone who was looking to invest, before superannuation, was going to be in a, worse off situation, or they were gonna basically be paying more tax and finding it harder to, to get ahead and develop that investment. So from my perspective, pitching, I guess, first home owners or people struggling to get into the market versus investors, doesn't really fly, right? Because anyone trying to develop an investment strategy that can't necessarily afford a home straight away is going to be an investor. So pitching, I guess, people who are, trying to save for a deposit or even invest for a deposit against existing investors, it doesn't really sit with me. Hence why I feel like a lot of what was coming out was more kind of like political spin. than actually looking to address the issues that they said they cared about. So that was very much present throughout the whole speech. Anyone I think who's worked in this space, and like a lot of the commentary I've seen online, it's very clear that anyone who has worked with individuals trying to help them to, save for a property, get into a property, invest their, investing, taxation, like anyone who's just been in the system, who's basically worked with people, is very much opposed to what the government's proposing. Yet the people who seem to be working in the public sector, working as academics, working as people who basically have always just really kind of like maybe, had an income, relied on their superannuation, those people are kind of like at the moment not understanding the, I guess, consequences of what some of the proposals will actually mean. And so that's obviously a bit of an issue, right? So let me take a back step and explain how the system works, right? In a healthy economy. So in a healthy economy, and one that is really good, you have a system that allows for upward mobility, meaning, the poorest people in your society are given an opportunity and a chance to develop wealth and raise up and invest and, become self-sufficient. So that's a definition of a good society, basically. Like, you're giving people that opportunity to be able to get ahead, invest for themselves, be prosperous, fund their own life. And then, at the end of the day, they don't, they don't require as much from the government as what, some people do. I guess that's the definition of a good society. At the moment, well, I guess, how do I say that? So previously, Australia offered a lot of that. So, the economic opportunity in the country was very much tailored towards, and, as Janine Ellis said, having a go, right? Within that, having a go, that allowed people to develop capital, start a business, hire people, which then had economic benefit, and then pay taxes, right? So within that private enterprise space, the robustness of that space allows for taxation to be generated and flows back to the government, right? And so in a healthy economy, you've then got your public servants who provide all those services that we do need, like, and back in the day, it was very much around like, infrastructure and transport and, that kind of stuff. So, really for a good functioning society that allows for upward mobility, you actually need both of those sectors to be performing well, right? You need the government to be as efficient as possible, providing those services, and providing kind of like that safety net that allows for, people that, might need to use those services to, to still get them. But you also do need that private sector to grow and be prosperous and hire, provide jobs and, generate profits so that then they have taxation to then filter that through back to the government. So then you can then have a healthy society. So that's basically how a good economy would work, right? We all know that. So everyone works together for the benefit of the economy. Nobody's pulling each other down. Nobody's saying, oh, you're getting too successful, you should pay more tax. Like that's not the definition of a good society, right? Because if somebody is prosperous in business, they're hiring more people, they're raising wages, they're being more productive, they're solving more problems and more issues. So we shouldn't be kind of like targeting them and branding them and pulling them down kind of thing. At the same time, we also shouldn't have a government that is so big and so powerful that they're in everyone's lives, they're in everyone's pockets, they're stopping everyone from doing anything because they need to prove that their job is relevant, right? So you need to get a healthy balance in a good society. You need everyone, regardless of what their role is, what their job is, who employs them, to basically have the revenue coming in, to pay the bills, to pay down the debt if we need to use it. Like it just all needs to function properly. So what I kind of was thinking, and I think a lot of people are thinking this at the moment as well, and it's traditional, this is what happens through Labor governments, is that they prefer to create bigger and bigger governance. So government structures, departments, the government, they're basically out there now telling everybody that, and I'm pretty anti this, right? Because if the government was working efficiently and effectively, why are our taxes so high anyway? But they're telling people now that the way to extract more resources or more money from the resources that we have here in Australia is by getting the government involved in the resource sector to manage that for everybody, so we all make more money. But is that how it works? Is that really how efficient businesses operate and run? No. So every time that the government gets involved in things that it doesn't have, the professional expertise to get involved in, we know cost blowout. We know projects fail. We know, look at Robodebt, for example. Like, the government killed a bunch of people.
It pretty much did. I have a question here. I'm wondering if you are seeing an element of control in all of this as well, because when so many people are dependent on the government for their livelihood, they are not, well, they may possibly be more reluctant to criticize the people who are feeding and paying them. Do you think this is becoming a control issue as well?
Definitely, because if you think about it from a Labor perspective, who is more likely to vote for the Labor Party? Is it the conservative-ish, well, I say conservative, what does that mean? But somebody who works in the private sector, who starts a business, who takes risk, who wants to get ahead and succeed, who's done really well, who is very much about building and conserving and preserving. Does that person vote for the Labor Party? Usually not. The people who vote for the Labor Party, the bread and the butter, are traditionally it was very much like the, working class person who did have just, they had a job and that was it for them. They didn't really want to do much else. Or it was the public servants, right? So if you're thinking about you're wanting to maintain your power in a society, you're always going to skew your policies towards how can we create more of us so that people will continue voting for us, they'll be dependent on us, and we'll be able to keep our power, right? So that was very apparent through the budget. They basically, with the changes to capital gains tax, that's going to penalise so many founders in Australia by paying more tax, right? So it's basically disincentivizing people to start businesses here, grow businesses here, take the risk. And they're basically cutting the reward at the end of it by saying that you need to pay all this extra tax now because we're going to change the taxation model, because apparently the old model was just not fair. Even though they're not the ones taking all the risk and doing all the work, right? So that was very apparent through the budget. So yeah, all the policies that, they were proposing around changes to the capital gains tax, changes to negative gearing, they're using these younger people who, at the moment are feeling frustrated. They can't afford to buy. Property prices have gone up. They might not know where to go to get advice as well, which obviously that's a secondary issue. That's something I'm obviously passionate about. But that's what they're using to justify raising taxes across the board for everybody and making everybody's life harder, while they sit there on their, $300,000 to $400,000 a year incomes that are set at least for the next election anyway, and then they might get a nice pension when they retire. So, they're really, what's the word? They're disincentivizing investment. They're disincentivizing starting a business. They're raising the level of complexity out there for people to actually try and manage their own wealth and money. And look, I was just talking to a financial advisor still working in the industry, and even they said, they started 10 or so years ago when it was cheaper to serve clients. It was easier to serve clients. It was less regulated. It was less complex. And so, I was also talking to someone in the government recently who called me a conspiracy theorist when I started raising these issues, is that why would a Labor government try and create a more complex tax system and a more complex system for people to try and invest, to try and get ahead, to, at a time when the cost of getting advice to people is has gone up exponentially. So
Yes.
you know, if they were really, like, this is what I think, like, if they were really about getting people into their first home, think about what people do when they want to buy, right? You just say you've got a good job, so you're probably really busy, you're working all these hours, but you've got good cash flow. Where do they go to learn how to develop a deposit? Or what do they do to develop a deposit, right? Like, you know, do they jump online? Do they jump on the internet? And let's face it, there's so much on the internet now, who knows what the hell that you should be listening to or not, right? You know, AI is great, but is it giving me the right advice? Is it right for me? Is it just giving me generic stuff? Who knows? So if the government actually wanted to get more people into homes, if they actually wanted people to then be able to afford those homes, why are they not doing anything about lowering the cost of advice? You know what I mean? And, you know, to turn around and say, like, you know, oh, well, people don't trust advisors anymore. Okay, how can we raise the trust threshold, right? How can we make people trust advisors? How can we create that relationship again and make sure that, you know, people in the industry are ethical, are professional, are, you know, it's seen as a profession, so that, you know, good quality people that don't, you know, do bad things want to enter it, and it's not too hard to enter. But how do we actually, you know, create that trust again, so that people know where to go to be able to get the advice, to be able to then know where to buy, how much they can afford, how should they develop a deposit. And let's not, like, sting them with too many taxes as well, because that's just going to, like, you know, raise the amount of time they actually need to develop the deposit. If they actually did want to get people into homes, that's what they do. But I'm not seeing any of that. All I'm seeing is a government trying to justify through any way, any means, how to actually charge people more tax. And let's face it, I'm just so over this narrative that, like, you know, we just have to keep paying more and more and more taxes. But when we start asking about what are we paying for, where's it going, you know, how are we contributing to it, what is a fair share, like, you know, you know, I might be paying 40, someone might be paying 200. Like, what is a fair share? You know, you're not allowed to, apparently. So it's, you know, I feel like the system that we had that allowed us to build the country, like I said previously and at the start, that system is just breaking down. You know what I mean? It's not working anymore. You've got people now being penalised for having a go, for starting a business, for trying to get ahead themselves at the expense of people who are looked after by the government, who are given a nice salary regardless of what they do. Doesn't matter if they go and blow up a hydrogen plant in Gladstone and waste $500 million. Like, who cares? Like, yeah, go for it. You know, they're looked after. They can do whatever they like. There's no accountability really there, because people don't understand, you know, a lot of people don't understand politics. They just hear I guess, the marketing messages. They get they get sucked in, and it actually takes people a long time to realize that they're actually being scammed, right? Especially
Okay.
if they're younger. Yeah.
I'll feed the rant for a second, because we are fed all sorts of things in the narrative. And one thing we need to translate and debunk early on in this is to say, when we are talking about investment, we're not only talking about the giant entities. We're not only talking about Coles and Woolies here. I keep going back to them, but they do run people's lives a bit. But we need to remind people that part of what we're referring to, and please let me know if this does include the really small businesses. I have two groups that I'm thinking of in my head. Firstly, there's the chip shop. And secondly, there's the person who does a day job doing whatever, and on the side, to really try to get by because things cost a lot, there's someone who, sure, might have tried doing a whole lot of Uber Eats deliveries, but then wants to feel independent and has set up a side hustle or a business that they hope will grow to more. There are so many Aussies who are, I don't mind if it's a little candle stall at the markets, whatever that might be, and they are hoping that it will grow, because keep in mind that, I won't name names, but a beloved skincare, it's not quite cosmetics, but there's a brand I know of that you'll find in the aisle of every bathroom section of the supermarket, that started off as a concoction in a kitchen, I can say that. It started as a concoction in a kitchen. So these small businesses have the potential to grow. And it sounds like these people, be it the chip shop that someone is completely serving all day long as their main source of income, their main business, or the side hustles that people hope will grow to more, the something more independent than serving Uber Eats, things like that. Or even people work in health and then some of the apps make you actually be your own individual ABN, things like that. So you're not really employed by someone. So all of these things are going on. So are we
Well,
talking about those people?
yeah, look, and I'll just say, like, it just shows how, I guess, ignorant and stupid this government is. Like I said, we all know from history that Labor loses elections on economics. Liberals usually lose elections on, I don't know, maybe the social issues, maybe climate change. I don't know. Like, I don't know why Liberals lose, but they do. Usually probably because they've been around for too long, not necessarily the economic side. But it's really silly, right? So the reason that we want a healthy small business community in Australia and one that is prosperous is that usually small businesses in Australia are, they operate in Australia, they do an annual tax return and they pay their taxes, right? They're good taxpayers, obviously, when things are going well, and they're accountable to Australia. They can't shift money offshore. Well, most of the time, they obviously, like, if they are just small businesses in Australia, it's a lot harder for them to have complex tax structures to be able to avoid tax. So that is good for the government, right? Whereas this government is like, oh, screw the small businesses. Who needs that? They're really good, like they're good payers and they're very good to actually get money out of. Let's screw that. Let's just let these big institutions dominate the Australian marketplace. And then let's keep running ABC documentaries about how the gas industry really just sells its product for nothing from Australia to Singapore and then sells everything from Singapore because the tax rate's lower and it's easier to do business there. So if the government knows that these multinationals are very sophisticated in their businesses to be able to then, operate in more favorable tax environments, we're going to give all the power to those guys, and then we're still going to be able to generate more and more revenue from the business sector. It just, to me, it doesn't add up, right? You actually do still want a healthy small business community, which is able to thrive, which is able to grow, which is able to create jobs. And with every job that you create, someone has to pay, obviously, personal tax, payroll tax, all the taxes that come through that way. So to try and disincentivize that within a community, I don't feel is sustainable. So if you think about, what they're doing now, adding complexity to taxes, making people pay more taxes if they want to invest, if they want to start a business, it's really not sustainable. Bringing in a taxation model for GST, not for GST, for capital gains tax that we had in, pre-1999, and then kind of like not addressing the fact that we got rid of that because the system was too complex, doesn't make a lot of sense to me, right? And so I just don't think these changes will be sustainable longer term if they do come in. So I will say this as well. I didn't say it at the start, but you've got to be careful as well, especially with government legislation and policy, that, the media will highlight issues. They'll say the government's looking to do this. They'll say this is what's going to happen. But until legislation is actually passed through both levels of parliament, that's when it becomes law. So all we know now is what the government's released in its budget papers, what they're proposing to do, what their intention is with policy. But until such time as they legislate that policy, we actually don't know whether it will become part of law in the country. So, so anything I say now, I'm basing on the fact that, Labor have suggested that this is the direction they want to go in. This is what they want to do. But again, until such time as it's legislated, we actually don't know, the wording of that legislation and how it will then flow into law within the economy. But I just can't see how any of it's going to be sustainable longer term. And at the same time, everybody knows that government spending's blowing out, right? Um, so where's the revenue coming from? All I'm hearing is like, let's shut everything down. Let's shut the resources down. Let's overtax everything. But as we know, if you've got no investment coming in, you've got no capital coming in, you've got no jobs being created, you've got no people paying tax. So where's the money coming from, right? Less people are like, trading properties now because, why would you want to, sell a property? What else are you going to do with the money if you sell it? Like I feel like it's all being done for politics and less for the actual, economy. And so I think people are going to start to realize that by the next election, when people are paying more taxes, when it's more hard to, buy a property or existing property or, get ahead, or pay for advice or pay for the cost of living, people are going to start to realize that not having an investment mandate is just going to basically not be great.
Okay, a few things here.
Yeah.
Buying a property. I'm going to take the leap and guess that people will even have more of a chance to buy a property if they are empowered to create their own businesses, partly because the world with AI overseas, with the global economy, the world is favoring founders now, but also how many people can really buy a house, especially in a major city, but in all sorts of places, how many people can buy a house with a typical salary these days? I'm assuming that people need to create a business at least on the side of a job, even if they don't want to do that as their entire occupation. Do you see that something like that is needed to even then own a home? So, even regardless of what measures are done specifically for housing, it seems like this area is going to impact housing affordability anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. So, when you buy a house, especially in an economy where house prices are high, it's not just about having the income, it's also having about the capital, unless you're one of that like top 0.1% of the population that, makes $1 million plus per year kind of thing, right? Like if you're someone who is the majority of people out there that, might be earning 100,000, 150 in a city, you've obviously got borrowing constraints around how much you can borrow. So if you do want to buy a home, you need capital. So where's the capital coming from now? How are you developing that capital? If you're saving in a bank account, that's going to take you forever, right? If the cost of living's high, and you obviously need a lot of, control over your spending. You need a lot of discipline. And so it's becoming harder and harder. If you want to, like prior to the budget and the changes coming in. So before, I guess the tax environment incentivized for more favorable outcomes if you were a growth investor. So to say, for example, you had $5,000 and you wanted to buy, a growth ETF and you wanted to generate,
So, what is that for those who don't know?
so an ETF is like a basket of shares wrapped up into one share, which is traded on the market. And so if you wanted, for that share price to exponentially grow so that you could obviously turn your $5,000 into $30,000, let's say,
That's
you
fun.
obviously you need good returns and you need favorable tax, right? But under this new tax regime that Labor want to bring in, you are now all you're now doing on your big gain is paying more tax. So the capital you've got left over is actually going to be smaller, right? So it doesn't favor people who are trying to invest that capital to develop more of a deposit to be able to have more of a deposit to buy a home in an environment where property prices keep going up, right? Like, yeah. So it's like I said to you, like the way that they've structured this new tax regime is penalizing anyone who doesn't have the capital at the moment to be able to afford to buy a home or afford to buy assets. And then telling people it's about getting them into homes, right? Like, I don't see how that's the case. The only thing that they're doing for that, which is obviously problematic, is that they have said that people can keep the 50% capital gains tax discount if they buy a new property, I believe. So if you're buying a new build, you can choose the model of taxation, which is obviously going to incentivize people to, buy new properties.
Hold
But
on,
at the
hold on. So that's not just a first home buyer, but an actual new property
A
that
new
is
property, yeah.
being built
Yeah.
new.
So I think the direction of the government is that they want people to be buying these new homes. And for established homes, obviously then, under the new tax regime, you'll just be paying more tax for holding these older homes. So
Okay, I'm going to call out the environmental angle here. I know we're sticking with the money talk, but I'm sorry, but if someone cares about the environment and wants people to use the resources that already exist, then why give people extra incentive just to pay for new builds in presumably new cleared land unless you're rebuilding on
well,
a
yeah, so
knockdown
I
rebuild?
guess we all know that this government and Labor governments all love to rely on immigration because it looks like the country is growing, right? Rather than working on productivity in the economy, getting people more productive, earning more money, paying more tax that way, like, growing. Um, they obviously want to bring in a whole bunch of new people, and they're hoping that those new people over time will then vote Labor because they'll owe them, which then obviously means that they can still win elections in the future. It's all strategic, right? Um, they obviously need to provide more housing for the amount of immigration we've got, because when you've got so many houses in an economy and you've got so many people, right? If you stick in a short period of time an exponential overload of more individuals into that economy, while not also building out the infrastructure and the housing to accommodate, you then put more pressure on the housing crisis, right? So this government actually needs people to be incentivized to help build those new homes in new, places to help build out the economy. That's ultimately what they're trying to do.
Interesting, interesting. And of course, as the housing turns into a crisis, it's impacting the quality of life and the health for people. I I can tell you, I've seen the most bizarre rental setups in Sydney. I think I might get away with calling this out. There was
Mm.
a place that I nearly moved to at the beaches, and then people revealed it was registered as a warehouse and not residential. Yeah, that's the place I was going to move to when I told you I was moving, and I realized, okay, I can't do this. And then I was looking at a place near another beach, and the so-called kitchen was literally out in the backyard under just a shed veranda roof thing. This isn't even a full shed. It was just this tin roof. I mean, sorry, that's taking the Aussie stereotype too far. What happens during rain or hail? This was not actual housing. That's I mean, I get that there's the phrase put a roof over your head, but let's go a step further, add walls.
Desperate times call for desperate measures, right? Like, yeah, it's not good. So I think that is obviously, so if you look, I was thinking about it today, right? If you look globally at different countries and economies where this socialist left agenda of making sure that everyone is poor and maybe 1% of people are rich, right? And not letting it, like I said, the social mobility, not letting anyone else get rich. If you look at how that's structured, like across the globe, it's actually pretty bad, right? So like Los Angeles, for example, we all know has the most homeless people in the whole of the United States. What type of governance structure does California have? Hugely left wing. We know that, right? Europe, for example, where is the highest rate of unemployment today in Europe? Finland. Is that a right or a left wing, society?
Looked into Finland a lot, but the example I can think of is Tony Robbins said that he visited a communist country, and he saw some, I think they were bureaucrats, they were public servants, whatever, living the whole lifestyle as then down the street people were lining up for, I don't know, bread rations, something like that. And
Exactly. So
so people
that
had
level
been
of yeah, so in socialist, communist, countries, we know just through people's experiences that the inequality gets worse. It doesn't get better. You actually do need a conservative right-wing government to tackle, putting the policies in place that allow for those people in poverty to be raised up and to be able to get ahead and get a job and then start to invest and then start to buy things and then start to self-fund, right? You need that structure in place, but it goes against that philosophy of the communist nation that everyone has to pay their fair share. Everyone has to pay thousands in tax. And if you're not paying, half your wage or 70% in tax, then you're a bludger. Like it's, you know what I mean? Like, could you imagine going to someone that has to live in that house because they can't afford anything else and saying, "Are you paying your fair share? Like, you should be paying more tax." Like, it's not actually what those people need, right? They need structure. They need a system that allows them to get out of that position and get into a position where they're productive people in society and they're giving back. And so, look, there have been, like I say, traditionally in Australia, we have had those, those systems, right? Like, people have grown up in housing commission and they've gone out and they've got really good jobs. They've skilled themselves. They've started businesses and they've been really successful. Like there's so many success stories out there like that. But if we change the tax system the way we are disincentivizing those people from starting those businesses, from giving it a go, from being able to develop that, that capital that they needed for that business to grow, right? And so that's where it becomes problematic. So in hugely socialist societies as well, people aren't talking about it at the moment, but allowing the 1% to hold everything and everybody else to have nothing, the risk in that is that, people get so angry and so upset that they end up burning your house down, right? Like the last time I was in LA, that was just before the fires. So I was researching about it. And yes, someone was getting charged for lighting a bunch of fires across LA. And it basically just everyone's house all these celebrities' houses went up in smoke, right? Because the issue is socialism doesn't work. Because if you don't give a go to the person that doesn't have anything, they're going to burn your house down someday.
these people didn't get the support that they needed, and that's what happened before they felt that resentment.
Exactly. And so the story was this person, was really resentful of rich people and they're all bad and tax the rich and screw them and all this kind of stuff. You realize that the rich haven't created that. The government has created that. That is a system problem, right? So if the government was smart and the government did care about people, they would be seeing this as a red flag, right? You want to lower that level of resentment in society. You want everyone to work together. Everyone, stop telling everyone they're going to be equal. Nobody is equal, right? Some people, unfortunately, are just severely disadvantaged, while other people are just, really, really lucky to be really skilled at something and do really well, right? You're never going to remove that from a society, that equal outcome, right? So we need to structure society so that regardless of what your circumstances, regardless of how much money you've got, regardless of how talented you are, everybody can work together to make it a better place.
Okay, that is busting the stereotype about economic conservatives, because you are not shaming the people who are in a particular circumstance, and you're not shaming the ones who have particular abilities or hurdles to overcome. In a way, it's the opposite. And I can relate to this so much. There are structures out there that pretend to give people opportunities when they're actually not. And also, I can have so much compassion for anyone who's trying to sort life out. And we know that that happens to people on this end of the political spectrum as much as the opposite. I'll say personally on my end, it feels like a month or two ago, if that, it was about a week or 2 before Easter that I fainted, and I realized I have to take a moment. And I have not seen many conservatives or people from that space at all saying, "Just get up already." No, people are compassionate. And what I'm seeing and what you are saying is that people need genuine opportunities instead of instead of restrictions and control over how the opportunities form, because there are more ways to look after yourself. Yes, people need to get a job, and that's a part of it, but people need more self-care than only having a job, and that does mean a business, and it can mean investing. I know that people are talking now about very small scale investing. I know that a lot of people, including myself, would have assumed that investing means you need thousands or millions to put something into something large. But have you seen there are very small scale ways for people to explore the possibility of investing?
Yeah, but that you have to be cautious now, right?
Mm.
So that's the main thing that came out of the budget was the fact that if you are an individual by yourself and you are, starting out or you're trying to develop some capital, um if you are now to invest into just saying a small investment and you top that up all of the time, as soon as you sell that now, if previously to the yeah, prior to what the, budget was announcing, you if you held that investment for over 12 months and it grew in value, you would get a 50%, discount on the gains that you made from that. So the remaining 50% would then be taxed at your marginal tax rate. And so that would be better for you as someone trying to develop some capital, to be able to kind of like, to develop that investment. But moving forward as an individual, if that's the case, so they're just about to change the model so that, let's say, for example, have $1,000 that you put into an investment, and you're topping that up all of the time with your salary and you're trying to build it, and then in 3 years' time, you sell it for 3,000 or whatever, or 4,000 or whatever. So you have to work out what the actual, and this is where it's going to get confusing, because you're now going to be taxed on the proposed gain that you've made in your own personal marginal tax rate minus the inflation of the actual investment.